Can you hear me? Hmm. I wonder if any of you can, if you can hear me and you can see the little group chat, you should type in there so that I can see that you hear me. Mhm. All right, let's see. Okay, I want to go ahead and get started. Hopefully you all can hear me. I'm not sure. I was hoping this group chat could work and that I could see what you guys put in there, but I don't see anyone being able to type in there. But if you are one of the people that have my phone number, you could always text me and let me know that you can hear me. So this is as far as it looks like that I can zoom in on the PowerPoints. But we'll start off with period 1 and then go into period 2 and do some multiple choice questions. This is just a review PowerPoint that goes over some of the basics. Period 1 will look a little bit different than period 2. So period 1, we know our starting year, we don't know, but 8,000, 10,000, 14,000, something, first human being, all the way until 600 BCE. And yep, that's unit 1. It's called foundations. We were talking the other day about the names for this, and we didn't know what period 1 was, but it is called foundations. So there's 3 key concepts in period 1. 1.1 is big geography and peopling of the earth. And that was everything that in your book was chapter 1. And then 1.2 and 1.3, the Neolithic Revolution and early civilizations, that was all in chapter 2 of your book. And remember, these are the things that you read over the summer. So it's been a while since you've probably looked at that, except for you when you're studying for your midterms. Okay. So key concept 1.1 is all about the Paleolithic period. So remember that the Paleolithic era is the very first humans, and they move from Africa up into Europe and then into Asia, and then into the Middle East and then to the Americas, etc. So you can see here from the map, first people, and here's how they move to different places in the world. They were hunter foragers. They adapted to the different environments that they were in, so they made new technology based on where they were, different clothing, etc., based on kind of the temperature and climate. They also use fire, which we've talked about a lot. You can see in this little picture of some cave dwellers here, they have a fire for hunting, for protection, for cooking, etc. And they had stone tools, and they lived in small groups. So maybe just a small family like this, and traveled together. And they had a pretty diverse diet because they were eating different, killing different animals, eating different nuts and berries, etc. Okay. And that pretty much covers 1.1. That's kind of all of that key concept there, and that pretty much covers most of chapter 1. So key concept 1.2 is all about the Neolithic Revolution. So we're still in period 1. The Neolithic Revolution is when they start farming, and you have your very first civilizations. So if you look over here on the right-hand side, when they start farming or creating agriculture, they're dependent on the same soil, so you don't have them moving around from place to place anymore. They have larger, bigger civilizations. They're sedentary, and the word sedentary just means that you stay in one place. And that's a word that you should know. It's come up quite a bit on exams in the past. Animal husbandry, so they were growing animals to then use them for food, etc. And they were, what's my word that I'm looking for? That'll come to me later. Anyways, and you had more social stratification. So because you had people settling, you had more wealthy people, more poor people, and your triangle becomes more intense as you have more social stratification. At the same time as you have farmers, you also have pastoralists. Remember, pastoralists are people with their herds of animals moving around from place to place. So pastoralists were smaller groups. They were mobile, moving around. They still hunted and gathered, but they had their group of animals with them. They would adapt to the environments, and they did ruin the environment, though, too, when their animals would kind of overeat. Okay? So that's key concept 1.2 about the Neolithic Revolution. Also in 1.2, it asks you, or part of the key concepts is, why did the Neolithic Revolution start? So the reason that people started the Neolithic Revolution was that they needed a more reliable source of food, because hunting and gathering can be unreliable. But farming, however, you've got a pretty reliable food source and you can save that for other times. And people started experimenting with plants and figuring out how they could make the best breed of plants. And then people wanted political organization. And then some people say the Neolithic Revolution was kind of just an accident that farming was discovered. The Neolithic Revolution also led to new social systems, which is also still in 1.2. And these social systems and cities, etc., are right here on this map. So these are your very first civilizations, and you do need to know this map and where these places are. So we've got Mesopotamia, which is right here in the Middle East. Remember, Mesopotamia is your land between two rivers, so the Tigris and the Euphrates. You've got the Nile River here in Egypt. Sub-Saharan Africa isn't on the map, but it would be all right here, everything under the Sahara Desert. The Indus River Valley over here in India and today Pakistan. The Yellow and Honghe River in China. The Mesoamerica right here, and the Andes region right here. Okay, so we've got like Mayas and Aztecs up here in Mesoamerica, the Incans down here, the Egyptians in the Nile, Sumerians. Indus River will become kind of the early civilizations in India, and then your first dynasties in China. So these are the very first civilizations. I wouldn't call them like, they're not big cities. Well, they're small cities. They're not empires yet, though. They're just kind of small cities in period 1. And then pastoralism is just all over. So these early civilizations, they had different crops and animals that they domesticated. That's the word I was looking for earlier. They cleared the land. They started irrigation, so you can get water in and out. Here's a good picture of irrigation. So you can see the field here, and they've cleared this channel so they can move water in and out of here. And they impacted the environment by clearing a lot of the forest to build these lands. And it transformed human societies. Population goes up, you have more people, etc. I think this is our last part of 1.2. Again, you have more clear social structures that develop because of this, more trade, transportation, specialization of labor, etc. Okay, so that's 1.2. So kind of just to go over this again. Sorry if that's making you dizzy. So 1.1, big geography and peopling of the earth is Paleolithic era. People are in Africa, they move out, they're hunting and gathering. 1.2 is Neolithic Revolution. So you've got your very, very early societies. They're learning how to farm, and then you also have pastoralists. And then 1.3 goes more in depth into those early societies. Okay. So if I scroll down, sorry again if it's giving you a headache, to 1.3, here's that map again of where those early civilizations are. And here's the 4 that we kind of focus on. So Sumer was in Mesopotamia. And if you remember, we talked about how their flooding was really unpredictable and they had no natural barriers. So they had a lot of floods, a lot of droughts, a lot of people invaded them. They had independent city-states, and they didn't have like one main king yet. But they created writing. It was called cuneiform. They had irrigation, they had bronze, metal, they had the wheel, the plow, etc. Egypt is quite a bit different because their river, the Nile, was predictable. So they could tell when it was going to flood and when it wasn't going to flood, and they could prepare for that. They were also surrounded by a desert, and so people didn't really invade them because they would have had to get through a desert to get there. The Nile was really easy to transport things up and down. They had a pharaoh and kind of central ruler. The pharaoh built huge cities. They had a writing system also, hieroglyphics. They built pyramids, had math, and had medicine. The Indus Valley in India had unpredictable flooding, but they did have natural barriers. They have the Himalayan mountains to the north, and they have deserts. And remember those crazy monsoon winds that we talked about when we talk about the Indian Ocean trade. They also had a strong central government, planned cities. They had a writing system, but we don't know how to read it yet. And they had cities, and they had the first plumbing system, which is pretty cool. And then China, also unpredictable flooding. So really, Egypt's the only place here where they knew when the flooding was going to happen. China also has natural barriers like mountains and deserts, and they're really isolated. They weren't trading as much because China was pretty far away. And this is when you see kind of the beginnings of Confucianism in China. So you see this big emphasis on community and family and a really strict hierarchy. The mandate of heaven is happening. And they also had writing, they had silk, they had money, they had iron, etc. So those are the four that we kind of focused on when we talked about those early civilizations. Of those early civilizations, they all mobilized labor. So what that means is they organized a system so they could get workers to do work for them. And they grew and competed for land. So they fought against each other for different land. And the people who had better access to things were usually the ones who would win those wars. So an example of this is this small empire right here called the Hittite Empire. I actually don't really know how to pronounce that. But anyways, they had access to iron. And so when they fought against other places, they won and they were able to grow a pretty big empire because they had all of this iron. And they used the iron in their farming, so they had more food than other people, and they used their iron for weapons, etc. And they took over other places. All right. Pastoralists are also still happening at the end of period 1 here. And they're creating new weapons, etc., as they're moving around from place to place. And then for all of these people, also you have different culture that is unifying them. So you've got religion happening, laws, languages, literature, monumental architecture. Here's the pyramids in Egypt. This is, what's it called? Tikal in Guatemala. The rich people would promote the arts. They wanted to show off a lot of their powers. They would have big art things or monumental architecture built for them. And people had laws and record keeping. Trade is also happening in period 1. They're trading mainly through water, but also over land a little bit as well. Hierarchies intensify, and you have your first books, like the Epic of Gilgamesh here, which is the first book ever written, which came out of Sumer in Mesopotamia. Egypt also had the Book of the Dead. Okay, so here's a practice multiple choice question. I was hoping that this chat feature would work so that you all could put in what you think. Here we go. What you think the answer is. But I'm going to stop here for a minute, and I'll actually time it for a minute. And I want you to read through this multiple choice question, try to come up with an answer. I think this one you've seen before. The other ones are new ones. But what I would suggest doing is kind of just glancing at the question first to get an idea of what it's asking, and then come up here and see. I wouldn't read word for word when you're reading these because you don't have enough time, but see if you can kind of scan it to get an idea for an answer, and then look down here and see if that matches. So I'll time you for a minute, and I want you to try to go through this and see what you come up with. Go ahead. It's a different little timer. Okay, so stopping there. So what I would do first is look at this, and it says the particular consequences evoked in the ritual curse most strongly supports which of the following about ancient Mesopotamia. So there is a potential that I can answer this without just reading. But I can go back, and so I know that this is a curse based on the question. I know that they're talking about Mesopotamia here, and it's saying, what does this curse show me about Mesopotamia? So if I look up here, and if you, my vassal, disobey or break this treaty, may the god put an end to all vegetation in your land. So even just from that first sentence, it looks like he's saying they've made some treaty, and this guy is saying if you break the treaty, then may the canal inspector of heaven and earth, so the god, so maybe may a god end all of your vegetation. So may he basically ruin all of your fields. So you can tell that when I'm reading this, that this is a really religious place, since it's saying God will ruin all of your vegetation if you break this treaty. And assuming that this is some government official. Oh yeah, this says it's a king. Oh, that was weird. So since I know that this is a king who's writing this, I can tell that the king must think he has a good relationship with God because he's telling the people, if you break this treaty, then God will ruin all of your fields. Okay. So if I look down here, we've got A, state's legitimacy was based on claims to secular authority. So the tricky question about this is you have to know what secular means. And I've confused this all the time as well. But if you don't know what secular means, this would be a good time to write it down. So secular means not religious. So state's legitimacy was based on claims to not religious authority, which would be the opposite of what this is. So I would immediately cross that out. Ongoing environmental degradation occurred as a byproduct of the spread of pastoralism. This isn't really, if I'm looking at it, doesn't really talk about pastoralism, so I would cross that one out. Maintaining and expanding agricultural production was seen as a core task of governments. That one would make sense to me because they're talking about agriculture, treaties about it, and it's a king who's discussing it. And then the domestication of plants occurred before the domestication of animals. Again, I know that just because this is 670 BCE, that we're in the Neolithic era, not the Paleolithic, and so this wouldn't really apply anymore, which should make the correct answer C. All right, second question. We've got the same passage, okay? But this time your question is, a historian would most likely use this passage in the treaty to illustrate which of the following. So again, I'm going to time you for a minute, and I want you to take a second to look over that and see what you would get. All right, and your minute is up. I was trying to pull this up on my phone to see if I could also hear it. And then I'll probably hear double. Anyways, okay, so I'm reading this one. A historian would most likely use this passage in the treaty to illustrate which of the following. So again, same passage. So I know that this is about some type of religious king in Mesopotamia who has, is either like super religious himself, maybe people see him as a god, or people just assume that he has good links to the gods, etc. The precarious nature of early civilizations' relationship to their physical environment. When I think of precarious, I just think of like strange relationship. This does talk a lot about the environment, so I would leave that one in there for now. The negative, this is supposed to say, ooh, what was this? Effect. Sorry, there's not two F's there. I didn't type them in. The negative effect of overpopulation on urban sanitation and health. So this didn't really talk about sanitation or health. It talks about a lot of like ruining things, but not about like how healthy people were. So I would cross B out. The emergence of social hierarchies supported by unequal distribution of surplus food. So that one maybe I would also keep in there because I can see that clearly this king has more power than whoever he's talking to. And then the nutritional deficiencies suffered by early agricultural populations. I know that that did happen, but I don't really see it in here, so I would cross out D. So that would leave me with A and C, the precarious nature of early civilization's relationship to the environment, and C, the emergence of social hierarchies. To me, C just sounds more like related to the key concepts, and that's something that was specifically brought up. A is a little too broad, which I know is kind of confusing because I've told you that the broad answers are usually the more correct ones. But I'm 99% sure. I'm just going to double check so I don't tell you the wrong answer. That C is the correct answer here. Let me just double check it for you. Okay, so 2, 1. Oh, nope. I was wrong. It is A. The precarious nature of early civilization relationship with their physical environment. So I guess go off of what I said before then, that this broader answer is the correct one. And then I guess our reason would not be C, because it doesn't talk as much about the social hierarchies, I guess, as it does their relationship to the environment. That makes sense, and it is the broader one. All right, take back what I said a couple minutes ago then. Okay, and then number 3 here. There we go. All right, same thing. Take 1 minute and go through number 3. All right, there was your timer for that one. Okay, so we've got, which of the following was an important long-term, sorry, my F's aren't in there, effect of the expansion of the Assyrian Empire? Okay. So this has nothing to do with the reading at all. And so for this one, I wouldn't even have to look back up at here. This is one where you've just got to know it. So what's a long-term effect of the expansion of the Assyrian Empire? And again, this one is really just like reading and knowing the information. The diffusion of monotheistic religions I could cross out because I know that none of those early, well, Judaism was happening, but Mesopotamia was polytheistic, so I could cross that out. The development of the Greek alphabet, again, not Mesopotamia, so I would cross that out. The initial diffusion of advanced mathematical knowledge, such as algebra and trigonometry. That one I would probably keep and think about. Or the establishment of Jewish diasporic communities as a result of Assyrian military conquest. That one I would also keep in there. So if I go back here where we talked about Sumer a little bit, we didn't mention math and science for them. We mentioned it for Egypt, which you could cross out C then, which would make your correct answer D. And I know we didn't specifically talk about this, but the Assyrian Empire does kick out the Jews for the first time and starts the Jewish diaspora. Which wasn't in your book that you read about. But this one's always tricky because I think it's hard for people to remember that the Jewish diaspora starts for that reason. Okay, so that kind of sums up period 1. I'm sorry I didn't have a brown background, but period 1 we did your IDs in brown because it's kind of the beginning. It makes me think of like dirt in the earth. Just to clarify, it's called Foundations. It's from 8,000, 10,000, 12,000, we don't really know this number, to 600 BCE. And you had 3 main key concepts. The first one was big geography and peopling of the earth, which, to summarize, was just kind of the Paleolithic era. People start in Africa and move outward. 1.2 was the Neolithic Revolution in early societies. So farming starts, pastoralism starts. That creates social hierarchies, more patriarchy, new inventions, trading, etc. And you have your early societies like Sumer, Mesopotamia, Indus River Valley, in China, the Honghe and Yellow River. And then 1.3, the development and interaction of all of those cities. So they build monumental architecture, they trade with each other, they fight with each other over resources. The people with better access to things are the ones that succeed and take over other places. And that kind of summarizes period 1. Period 1 is only 5% of the test. So on the practice exams that they have online, it's usually only about the first like 3 to 6 questions of the test. And they have not had, they've had it as a choice for a SAQ, but it will not be an essay. So probably the least amount of your studying should be spent on period 1. Okay, so now we'll move on to period 2, which is known as the Classical Age or the Classical Era. And this is from 600 BCE to 600 CE. So that one should be easy to remember your timeline here. Remember, in the middle of this it would be 0, and that would be when Jesus dies or is born, would be 0. So when I think of period 2, we did it red for all of the different religions, and I think of Christianity be kind of right in the middle of this time period. So what I'm going to do for this one, because there's a lot of chapters, I'm going to just briefly go through all of the chapters from your book, and then I will go through the key concepts for them. So the first chapter you read was chapter 3, which was on Greece and Persia. I kind of wish I had a bigger map here, but Greece is in kind of down near the Mediterranean Sea here, and Greece is composed of a ton of different islands. And because of that, oh, and right here they have a bunch of mountains. So because of that, they had to have all those different city-states because they're so separated. It would have been hard to have one major government because, like, let's say the king was here, it's not really like he can communicate with these people over here on the island. So they have a bunch of these different city-states. They called these polis. And they had different types of societies on all these city-states. Some of them were military societies. Some of them were democracies. Some of them were really based on philosophy. The ones we talked about in class were Sparta and Athens, Sparta being really military-based and Athens having our first democracy. And we talked about all the different philosophy in ancient Greece, like Aristotle, etc. And one way that they tried to unite all of Greece is that every couple of years they would have the Olympics. And, excuse me, all the different city-states would come and they would have these games against each other. And that was also a way to kind of prevent war because you would have these games instead. Alexander the Great eventually takes over this area. And then the Persian Empire, so if you look at this map here of Persia, Greece would be like right here. So the Persian Empire is all next to Greece over here. Very big. The Persian Empire is my favorite one because this is the one that Darius ruled that everyone seems to forget about. Very disappointed. But first the ruler was Cyrus the Great, and then after him was Darius the First. Darius built the Royal Road. So this is really your first big road system that gets built. And remember, they have the post office on that road system where they deliver mail for the first time. Their capital city is Persepolis, which I think you guys pronounced differently when you read the book last year, but would be the same city that you read that book about last year in English. They're religiously tolerant. Anyone could be whatever religion they wanted. But Darius and the other rulers, their official religion was Zoroastrian. And remember, Zoroastrian is one of the first, people debate it, monotheistic religions. So that kind of summarizes chapter 3. You had Greece and the Persian Empire. And then chapter 4, we talked about the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire comes after those two and takes over pretty much all of this area. Huge space. The Roman Empire went through a couple of different phases. So remember, it started off as a monarchy, and it was polytheistic. It actually did not like Christians at the time or any monotheistic people. Polytheistic, kind of based on like the Greek gods, things like that. And then they turned into a republic where they elected officials. It was more like a democracy, not really, but kind of. They had a law code, they expanded, they had enslaved people. And then third, Rome turns into an empire. Kind of goes back to being like a monarchy where they've got one leader. And that's where they finally expand for where it looks like this. Just like Persia, they also build a lot of roads. You can see a picture here of some of the roads that they built. And they adopted Christianity in the empire, and it becomes the official religion, which is why today in the actual city of Rome in Italy is close to where, or the Vatican, I guess, is in Rome, is where the Vatican is today. So why did they decline and fall? So they got so big and a bunch of disease spread to the empire. A lot of people died. They had environmental problems like deforestation, overgrazing, and Germanic tribes invaded them and took over. And so the Roman Empire at the end of this period falls. All right, chapter 5, you read about India and China. So in India, we started off with the Aryan people, and they were the ones who were studying the Vedic religions, which would become Hinduism. So they were kind of, I think they were more like nomadic people, so I could be wrong about that though. But the caste system starts to develop in India, and their main religion ends up being Hinduism. But they also have other religions like Jainism and Buddhism. You remember these are probably the two main empires that you need to know for period 2, are the Mauryan Empire and the Gupta dynasty. So the Mauryan Empire was Ashoka, and he was the one, remember was that horrible guy who like killed everyone? Here he is. And then he converted to Buddhism and was like, oh, never mind, I shouldn't kill everyone. And so he tries to convert other people to Buddhism and spreads the religion throughout India. It still doesn't totally catch on, though, because Hinduism is just so strong in India. And then after that is the Gupta dynasty, which expands. They're really big on science and math. And this is the golden age in India. They're a really great dynasty until they fall and period 2 ends. And then China, this is the Qin and the Han dynasty is in period 2. So the Qin dynasty expanded China. They built walls, which would eventually become the Great Wall of China, part of it. And that was that crazy, I think I showed you guys a video in class. He was like a 13-year-old who was the ruler of the dynasty, and he was like crazy, and he would kill people and bury them in the walls, and he made all those terracotta soldiers, like thousands of them, so that they could accompany him into the afterlife. And then the Han Dynasty are the ones who started the civil service exam, the Silk Road. But this is also when, at the end of period 2, disease comes in, they have a rebellion, and then China also falls. Also in China during this is when Confucianism is really spreading more. So we see it start in period 1, but it really spreads in period 2. And again, just this emphasis on family, respect, ancestor veneration, like we saw when we watched Mulan. Okay, and then finally, your last one for period 2 was the American civilizations. So we talked about the Moqui, which were in South America near Peru. They had monumental architecture, they had beans, corn, llamas, and then they vanished and we don't know why, maybe climate change. And then we talked about Teotihuacan in Mexico City, that great city that, as you know, in period 3, the Spanish will take over. They had a really strong government, really great architecture as well. And then we also talked about the Mayans in Mesoamerica, who were using slash and burn agriculture, terraced farming. They had city-states, they were huge, but they got so overpopulated and they had a drought that they just left all of their cities and moved back to the rural areas. So that covers chapters, we read 3, 4, 5, and 6 for period 2. So Greece and Persia, Rome, India and China, and then these early ones in America. So the key concepts for period 2, you also have 3. You've got development and codification of religious and cultural traditions. So this just goes over basically like what were all the new religions in period 2. 2.2 is development of states and empires. So this goes over what were the new empires in period 2. And then 2.3 is trans-regional networks of communication and exchange. So this is all about trade. So period 2 is when all these trade networks start, like the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean trade. And that's what this one is about. So the first one about religion here. These are all the religions that you're required to know. Okay, so you're required to know that Judaism starts in period 1. Period 1, and then into period 2, which is a monotheistic religion. Remembering that Judaism, you have the Jewish diaspora in period 1 when the Assyrians kick them out and they have to move to other places. And that's how Judaism spreads to other places, is because they get kicked out and they have to move to different locations. And then Hinduism, which is primarily in India. It starts from the Vedas, which was that series of books. Okay, I should have changed this. I think we'll All right, I think I'm back. I just need to I lost my internet there for a second. Let me bring my screen back up. Okay, there we go, hopefully. Yep. Okay, so these are all the new religions in this time period. So we've got Buddhism is new, starts in India, started by Siddhartha Gautama, wants to end suffering. Ashoka spreads it. Taoism also starts in period 2. It starts in China. Remember, we've got our yin-yang for Taoism, about being in harmony with nature, balance. Confucianism starts in China, focuses on family, honor, very patriarchal, and filial pieties like respect to elders. Christianity also starts in this time period. And it's like Judaism, except for Jesus is the Son of God, and Christianity spreads, and then Rome accepts that as its official religion. Greco-Roman philosophy also starts in period 2. So Greece, remember, had all these different gods. They also had, oh, okay, good. It won't let you comment. That's interesting. Anyways, Greece and Rome had all these different philosophers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. You also have animism, which was in period 1 and continues. That's all about like animals have spirits, nature has spirits. Ancestor veneration, so worshiping of ancestors. And you see in period 2 a lot of rulers using religion to justify their rule. So that is 2.1, all about religion and culture. And you kind of see that in all of your chapters in period 2. 2.3, or 2.2, excuse me, the key concept is all about those states and empires. So in Persia, I wouldn't really worry too much about knowing these specific names. I would just know in Persia, I mean, you should know Darius just because I really like him. But Alexander the Great eventually takes over Persia, and they start the royal roads. In China, you should know that this is the Qin and the Han dynasty for period 2. The Qin dynasty centralizes, unifies, it grows. The Han dynasty has the Silk Road, etc. In India, you should know that this is the Mauryan and the Gupta Empire. The Mauryan with Ashoka, Buddhism, rock and pillars. Gupta, science and technology, great time. In Greece, you should know you've got lots of different things, democracy, military, etc. They get conquered by Alexander the Great, like Persia. You should know in Rome that they started off as the monarchy or kingdom, went to a republic, and then went to an empire. And then in Mesoamerica, that you've got these different places like Teotihuacan, this big city, the Mayans who had the calendar and then moved back to the rural areas, and then the Mochi in Peru. And then you should know that for all of these empires, and this has been a question on the exam before, why they all rose. So they all rose because of bureaucracy, which just means governments. So they all started governments, and that helped them to rise. It's hard to have a civilization without a government. They also all started codifying their laws or just creating and putting together law codes. So some examples of that would be like Justinian's law code, except no, Justinian's is not until period 3. That was a typo. But anyways, they codified their law codes. A lot of them built roads, they had militaries, they had slavery, and that's what allowed them all to rise as big empires. And then the reason that they all fall, a lot of them destroy the environment. They're cutting down trees, they're building big places to farm, etc. Most of them get invaded by outsiders. So Persia does, China does, India does, Greece and Rome do. These all get invaded. Mesoamerica doesn't get invaded yet, but all the rest of them do. A lot of them have internal revolts. Your biggest example there would be China with that Yellow Turban Rebellion where you have peasants revolting. And then most of them also get disease. Particularly everyone but Mesoamerica gets disease, and that's one of the reasons that they fall. So again, 2.2, states and empires, they all rise for these reasons. They all fall for these reasons. All right, and then 2.3 is all about trade. So if you see in this map here, you should be able to identify them. So this trade route right here would be Trans-Saharan. This trade route right here is the Mediterranean trade. This trade route right here is the Silk Road. And this trade route right here is the Indian Ocean trade. I think what they're going for here is like the Roman roads and the Persian roads would be my guess with the green. Not 100% sure on that, but these would be your major 4 for this time period. So the trade routes, Silk Road, Indian Ocean, Trans-Saharan, Mediterranean. All of these trade routes begin in period 2. And a lot of them start because of new technology. So remember in the Trans-Saharan trade, we talked about those saddles a lot for the camels. In the Silk Road, we talked about the stirrups for the horses. For the Indian Ocean trade, the new sails and the new ships called dhows, which allowed them to sail better. And in the Silk Road, also the yokes, which would tie the animals together so that they could carry more stuff. And you should know about the things that they traded. So rice, cotton, so different goods, you know, food, silk, things like that. You also had a lot of technology that's being traded. So like how to do irrigation was traded from Persia to Asia, different things like that. Also diseases are spread. And here's just the name of some of the diseases. Interesting. And then religions that are spread, like Christianity is spread, Buddhism is spread, Hinduism is spread. All of this from the trade routes. Okay. So to summarize, period 2 is called the classical era because these are all classical civilizations. The way your book organized it was kind of by empire. So we had, Greece and Persia, the Roman Empire, India and China, the early American civilizations. And then your key concepts, you've got 3 of them. The first one is all about the new religions. The second one is all about the empires. And the third one is all about trade. So religions, you've got Judaism, Hinduism, going from period 1 into period 2. You've got new religions like Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and Christianity, philosophy. And then you've also got people still practicing animism and ancestor veneration. States and empires, you've got all of these different states and empires in the different places. All of them rose because they had governments, roads, militaries. All of them fell because they destroyed the environment. People invaded. They had internal revolts and disease. And then finally was trade. We've got our major trade routes, Trans-Saharan, Mediterranean, Silk Road, and the Indian Ocean trade. And all of those had new technologies that helped them grow, and they traded all of these things. Okay. So period 2, I kind of think of like, period 1 is just the very beginning. Period 2 is like, boom, all these new empires. They all rose and grew during this time. And then at the end of period 2, they all fell. I'm sorry that you can't ask questions, but question coming in from text message. Do the Americas have any empires in this time? Just the Mayans in period 2. But then the Mayans moved back to their rural areas at the end. Okay, so some practice multiple choice questions for period 2. So this is one that you have not seen before. I hope if you can, if it's too small on your screen, maybe if you can zoom in a little bit to be able to see it. If I zoom in any further, I'm worried, I don't think you'll be able to read that's probably the furthest that I can zoom in on you. And oh, I can make this bigger. Whoops, sorry, y'all. That probably would have been helpful beforehand a little bit. Okay, so this is one that you haven't seen before, but is one that College Board has written. So same thing as before, I'm going to time you for a minute, and I want you to read through and try to answer this question. I will start your minute timer right now. Okay, there's a minute. There we go for the timer. Sorry, I moved it so it's not totally on your screen anymore. Okay, so we've got for our question here. Compared to the regulations in the excerpt, Buddhist practices concerning gender roles in the period 600 to 600 differed in that they. Okay, so I know based on this that it's asking me whatever religion this is or whatever's going on in this, how does that compare to Buddhism? And so I've got a, whoa, that gave me a weird, okay, sorry guys. So let me zoom out enough. Nope, that went all the way down. Sorry, scrolling back. Scrolling. Okay, here we go for number 1. So if I'm looking, there we go. All right. So looking at this, I've got marriage precedes all other duties of life. There are different types of marriages. The giving in marriage of a bride with a dowry, the giving in marriage of a bride in exchange for cows. Okay, so there's different ways marriage can happen. So as I'm reading this, I'm just thinking briefly, like you can marry a bride to a priest. You can have a voluntary union of someone that they actually love, but it looks like most of these are probably not by choice for the woman. Like the woman is getting exchanged for cows, or the woman is being given to a priest, or the woman's family is getting a lot of wealth, etc. So it says of these, the first 3 are ancestral customs, and that they're valued and they're good. And the rest are sanctioned by the father and mother. Any kind of marriage is approvable. Okay. So it looks like all these different types of marriages are good, but then it says, sons begotten by men of higher caste and women of lower caste are considered to be of mixed caste. Sons begotten of men of lower caste and women of higher caste originate on account of kings violating all norms and proper behavior. So it looks like lower class men and higher class women cannot get married, but men of higher caste and women of lower caste can get married. Okay, so a man could marry a woman who's lower than him, but a woman cannot marry a man who's lower than him, which makes sense because it looks like a lot of these, it's the woman's family who's getting all of the money. So if the woman was rich, her family would want her to marry someone who's the same or someone who's higher. Okay. And this is a legal code for Chandragupta, a Hindu ruler of the Mauryan dynasty. So I know Mauryan is period 2, that this is in India, and that they're Hindu. So how does this compare to Buddhist practices? I'm just going to zoom in on this so I can see it a little better. All right, so A, rejected the validity of marriage as an institution. So I don't think that Buddhists completely rejected marriage, like people got married. So I would cross off A. Offered women and men the possibility of monastic life as an alternative to marriage. So I do think that they did do that, because remember we talked about monasteries, and like monks in Buddhism could go to monasteries. Then they couldn't get married. They would like be monks forever and never get married. So I'll leave B there. C, gave the bride's mother rather than the father the primary role in making marriage decisions. I don't know really in any place in period 2 where the woman is getting to make those decisions. So I would cross off C. And then D, asserted that only marriages based on the free choice of both spouses were valid. So that's one that I would also pretty immediately cross out, because like the idea of getting married by choice is pretty new, like very like last 100 years type new, which would leave me then with B. Yep, B is the correct answer, because in Buddhism, I know that they had monasteries and monks could go there. Also, if I wasn't sure what this meant, monastic life, I could still get rid of A, C, and D and just process of elimination, go with B. And let me double check. Yes, B is our correct answer. Okay, next question. So you've got that same reading again. I'm going to leave it like this so that you can see it a little bit better, since we just kind of read this top part together. But I want you to take 1 minute again to go through this question and try to come up with your answer. Your 1 minute starts now. All right, there's my timer. Okay, so for this one, the views expressed in the excerpt are best seen as evidence of which of the following in Mauryan society. So again, this whole excerpt is about marriage, and I know that this is a Hindu society in India. So we've got A, the persistence of patriarchy. So remember that patriarchy means that men have more power than women, and persistence is like it continues. So for this, I would say men definitely have more power than women. So I would keep A. B, the absence of intercaste marriages. So that one I would cross out because it looks like right here they do have intercaste marriages, that you can get married between different castes. So I'd cross off B. C, the social acceptance of children born out of wedlock. They don't talk about that at all. I would also assume that it would probably be pretty bad if you had a child born out of wedlock in this society. But again, they don't even talk about it, so I would cross off C. And then D, the ruler's lax enforcement of religious doctrine. I would say all of this is pretty religious since it's talking about the caste system, and I know that Hinduism is tied to that. And it also says that the ruler right here is a Hindu ruler. So I would say that the ruler would not, lax just means like, I think like chillax, like very like like they're not really enforcing it. So I would cross off D, which would make our correct answer A. And this is probably the answer anytime you see this, that patriarchy is still strong, because in most cases it is. So A is our correct answer for that one. Okay, third one. So let's take a minute to do this last third one for this section. I will start your minute now. Okay, I'm going to stop you at 30 seconds because this one is pretty easy. Which of the following changes to the Mauryan religious policy occurred under Chandragupta's grandson, Emperor Ashoka? So remember, what things do we remember about Ashoka? He's the evil guy who converts to Buddhism and then is like, I shouldn't have killed anyone, and tries to spread the religion. So A, the emergence of a syncretic Indo-Greek system of religious belief? No. B, the secularization of the Mauryan state. So remember, secular means not religious. And we know that Ashoka was religious, so no. C, the promotion of Buddhist teachings through edicts by the ruler. Yes, he promotes Buddhism. It's definitely C. But anyways, D, the establishment of Islam. Islam, you know, is not until period 3, so you could cross that one off as well, which would make that correct answer C. Okay, so I've got another set of multiple choice questions, and I will end the call at 1 o'clock, so we've got about 9 more minutes to kind of look at a couple more multiple choice and then a short answer as well. I know that the comment thing for some reason won't let you comment, but if you do have any questions, feel free to email them to me right now, and I can cover them in these last couple of minutes. Okay, so the multiple choice questions, I need to zoom it out so you can see. There we go. So they are based off of this chart. These are also multiple choice questions that I don't think that you've seen yet, but are created by College Board. So this is again on period 2. I'm going to give you 1 minute to look at this multiple choice question. Your 1 minute starts now. Okay, there's your timer for a minute. Okay, so looking at this chart, so it's super important that you make sure anytime you get a chart or graph that you really pay attention to the title of it and anything about the source. So I can see that this is titled Percentage of Villages Depopulated in the Western Roman Empire, 400 to 500 CE. So I know that this is at the end of period 2, and I'm thinking in my head, okay, why is all the population of Western Rome being depopulated or like going down? And I know at the end of period 2 that the Roman Empire falls. So this makes sense to me that a lot of their population would decline because the entire empire falls at the end of period 2. And this down here, I can tell this is a graph from 2011. So some type of secondary source that probably a historian made to show how the population fell. And all of these places are different villages that are in the Roman Empire. Okay, so which of the following best explains the overall demographic trend shown in the graph? So demographics, remember I think of like population, etc. So the trend to me based on this graph is that they're all going downward. So what would explain why they all went down? The spread of the bubonic plague by Mongol invasions. So at first you might be like, yes, diseases, that's it. But remember that Mongols are not until period 3, so you can immediately cross off A. B, migrations to Christian population centers in the Mediterranean. People aren't like moving to Christian centers. We've never talked about that, so you can cross off B. C, forced migration of populations by the Roman government. Again, never talked about that, so we can cross off C. D, invasions by Germanic and Central Asian peoples. Yes, we talked about how Rome fell because it was invaded by Germanic peoples. So your correct answer there would be D as in dog. All right, here's your next one. Same graph. Let's go for about 30 seconds since you've already seen the graph. And I will start the timer now. All right, and that's your 30 seconds. So we've got which of the following best describes the Roman response to the trend shown in the graph? So I'm thinking when everything falls, when they get depopulated, what does Rome do? A, shifting power and resources to the east, eventually resulting in the creation of the Byzantine Empire. And I do remember that does happen afterwards because period 3, Rome splits in half, the Byzantine Empire is created. So I'll leave A. Sponsoring the further development of commercial infrastructure, particularly roads. When I think about what happens after Rome falls, remember feudalism happens, they move back to cities, they're not really making roads. So I'd cross off B. C, adopting Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire. That had already happened, so I can also cross off C. And then the last one, building an elaborate system of fortifications along the northern frontier, such as Hadrian's Wall. We never talked about that. I also know again that they left the cities, which would leave us with A being the correct answer. Because again, it's asking kind of what happens after this, and after this is the Byzantine Empire. Okay, last multiple choice one, same graph. Let's take 30 seconds again. Go ahead and get started. All right, and that has been 30 seconds. So we've got which of the following emerged in Western Europe after 500 CE, in large part as a reaction to the changes illustrated in the chart. So this is kind of similar to the last question about what happened afterwards, but this time it's particularly asking me about in Western Europe. So I probably would have underlined this here because I remember Europe will split in half, West and East, and the West will go back to feudalism and the East becomes the Byzantine Empire. So, what's happening in the West? So we've got A, the development of cash crop plantations relying on slave labor. Cash crops make me think of period 4 in the Americas, so I would cross that off. B, the binding of peasants to the land as part of the development of a feudal society, probably because it's feudalism. C, the shift from agriculture to nomadic pastoralism in most of Western Europe. They don't go back to being nomadic, so we can cross that off. And then D, the development of self-governing professional guilds. They do have guilds, but B would be your correct answer of feudalism and peasants in period 3 is kind of the reaction to this. Okay, so the very last thing I have on here is a practice SAQ. I'm not going to write it with you because we just have a minute left, but this is one that you haven't seen before that College Board did release. So if you remember when we took the midterm, the third short answer question will be that choice, where you'll either have like 3 ABC or 4 ABC, and you'll choose one of them. So this is one as they gave as that choice for the last one. So it doesn't have a picture, doesn't have a graph. It just has the straight questions. So you have A, identify one way in which Judaism influenced the development of Christianity. B, explain one difference between the spread of Christian communities and the spread of Jewish communities. And C, explain one similarity between the spread of Christian communities and the spread of Jewish communities. So they're asking you for similarities and differences and how one influences, it's 1 o'clock, the other one. So, I also got another question. Thank you for your question about what are guilds from this last question here. Guilds were like those, they were like the little, I think of them like unions now. I'm trying to remember what we read about them in the books. They were in Europe, and it would be like if a bunch of people who made swords were like, let's start a swordsman guild, and all the people who make swords will be in like a little organization. And if something happens with all of our swords, we can come together and have meetings about it. So kind of like modern day unions today, where like today we have like teacher unions, and all the teachers get together and say like, oh, this is, we all need to try to fight for this or do this better or something like that. So a guild was kind of like that. And I think of them as like medievally jobs, like sword makers and things who would kind of get together. Good question. Okay. So anyways, this short answer. So I'm not going to go over the answers right now, but if you would like to do some extra practice, you are welcome to type up answers to this and email them to me, and I can email you back feedback on them. If not, I can go over these briefly next time we do the video and go over the answers. But on the SAQs, remember you'd have about 15 minutes to do A, B, and C. So if you'd like to try and practice these, you could time yourself for 15 minutes and then just type up some answers, and I can send you some feedback on that. But if not, I will go over the answers when we start the next video on period 3. So that is that. I don't think I've gotten any other emails or questions that I can answer right now. But the next time that we will, I don't remember the next date that I chose for you. Let's see. There we go. So next time that we will have a video is the 29th. So on Saturday from noon to 1. And I will go over all of period 3 on that one and kind of just do a brief review of period 1 and 2 in the beginning. Thank you for watching in. I hope that was helpful. Email me with any questions or anything that you'd like for me to look over. Oh, and have a good rainy day. Enjoy the thunderstorms later.